newspaper, but I also look after cultural coverage. Fashion, food and wine, a little bit new to me.
This is like a reward for journalists who've been on the streets for a long time. They bring them in, let them manage some people, and let them cover something fun where they get invited to dinner.
But for the first 18 years of my career, I was a court reporter, legal reporter. I have many years of experience in London and in Hong Kong, covering court cases, writing about legal issues.
And in fact, Cliff actually has a master's degree in human rights law from this university, and also a common professional examination post-graduation qualification in law. It's one of the reasons that we actually brought him in here, because we want to talk about legal aspects of the internet. So we're going to begin that now. All right. So I want you guys to think about, we're going to open this up for questions as we usually do towards the end of the hour. Think about what you'd like to learn from Cliff, anything that we didn't cover, and be ready to ask. Okay? We again have our mismatched chairs, so it looks like we're in different positions here, but this is to emphasize he's the important one, okay?
I'm not sure I feel comfortable with it.
It's okay. All right, we want to talk about privacy here. And what's really interesting with the internet, I think we've all kind of discovered this in some ways, is that the internet is a really amorphous entity. Meaning that it lacks clearly defined borders. It transcends borders, in fact. It transcends the borders of geography, it transcends the borders of ideology, it transcends the borders of taste sometimes, of interests. It creates identity by reinforcing ideas, sometimes negating them. So there's all different aspects that we have. But what's become clear is the internet doesn't seem like an entity that's very easy to control, even though people have tried it. And what we're beginning to also see, though, is that we use it in a way that it begins to reveal things about ourselves. In some cases, that's voluntary, the information that we put on Facebook or Weibo that identifies who we are, the pictures that we post, those kind of things. But also what's going on right now is sometimes internet companies, large portals, or taking the information that you provide, or taking information that you think you weren't providing simply by hitting like on something or posting a photograph that has a certain type of content, and they're doing what's called data mining. They're taking that information and they're creating a profile of you, what you're about, what your likes are, what your interests are, who is likely to be able to sell you a specific type of product. And in framing that kind of long exposition about the internet, we want to ask Cliff, knowing what we know, providing the information that we provide on the internet, can any of us reasonably expect any privacy at all?
Well, I think a yes or no answer to that question is difficult, because it depends how you define privacy and what level of privacy we can expect. I know that one of my colleagues, Alex Lowe, who writes a daily column, was recently suggesting in one of his columns that we had made sort of a Faustian pact, like a pact with the devil. We accept the internet. I'm sure you will use it and benefit from that. Revolutionized our lives. But there is a flip side to that. When we use the internet, when we buy things on the internet, when we use social media sites, we reveal things about ourselves. And what we are finding is that it is very difficult in such an environment to maintain your privacy. It's when you say information about you may think, why would anybody want information about you? But if you think about it, the information about the websites that you go to, the interests that you have, maybe information about your standard of living, knowing how to contact you. If you are running a business, you are looking for customers, you are looking for people to use and pay for the services you offer, or to buy your products. This sort of information is very, very valuable indeed. If you have a database that you can compile, or if we take Hong Kong, a database of people who, for example, enjoy listening to music. Take a typical example. What types of music are they interested in? What would they be interested in purchasing? Now, I don't know, you may all be thinking that you don't pay for your music anyway, so why should anyone worry? But just to use that as an example, collecting this sort of information, maybe being able to contact you. I'm sure you all get spam emails, being able to offer you certain products. Very, very valuable information. Potentially valuable to media organisations as well when they're looking for advertising, and being able to say to advertisers, come and advertise on our site, because a lot of wealthy people come to our site, are subscribers on our site. They come and look at our site and they're very interested in food, wine, or interested in music or whatever it may be. So we need to recognise that there is a demand for information of this kind, and simply by using the internet we expose ourselves to this.
I wonder if any of you have had this experience where you've gotten an ad on one of your social media websites that seems almost creepy to you, like they know more about you than you thought. Any of you? Maybe not. Okay. Maybe they don't think that you're their prime consumers yet. I know it happens to me a lot, and it's strange. Like if you express an interest in something, a sporting event, or as Cliff said, food or wine, and then all of a sudden the next day or even the next few hours, you start to get advertisements on your social media for a wine company or for restaurants, that kind of thing. So if you haven't experienced that yet, start to be aware of that. Look at what you've ticked off on your social media websites under your interests. Look at the kind of photographs that you're posting and begin to see if you're getting a reflection of those ads that are aiming toward that interest. Let's talk about privacy in kind of greater terms. Let's talk about it regionally. We look at Asia as being the largest number of internet users percentage-wise in the world. You guys remember the statistic that I showed you the last class? What was it? Someone shout it out. Do you remember? I think it was 43%, right? 43% of the world's internet users are in Asia. So that means they're impacted certainly by the regulations and the restrictions that come with the governments that they are citizens of. So let's talk about that a little bit. And we obviously want to talk about China, but let's talk about right here in Hong Kong. We're an SAR, Special Administrative Region, and we don't experience the same kind of censorship or restriction in China, but do we experience some of them? And if so, what are they?
Correct. Yes, Hong Kong is in a different position to many other jurisdictions, places, jurisdiction, a legal entity in the region. You will know that as part of China, Hong Kong is governed by a concept known as one country, two systems. So part of China, different system, different legal system to China. And that has a big impact on the way in which matters such as free flow of information play out.
Are there actual websites that are blocked in Hong Kong as well? And are we seeing physical restrictions of access?
Not seeing physical restrictions to access in Hong Kong. In Hong Kong, we don't have the sort of filtering that you have elsewhere in the world, and I'm sure if you have experimented, you will find that you can access websites that are critical of the government. Indeed, you see in newspapers in Hong Kong, have very robust media here. You will see all sorts of things being published. the difficulty in Hong Kong. More is more in the area of when you are posting something on the internet yourself. And you just need to be aware that when you do that, you are publishing, which means that just as I write something in the South China Morning Post, there are certain laws that I have to be aware of, certain things that can be risky. When you use social media in Hong Kong, if you are blogging, now okay, maybe you don't run the same risk because South China Morning Post has a lot of money, maybe people are going to, lots of people see it, but you do need to be aware if you take something like defamation, damaging people's reputations unfairly, saying things about them which turn out not to be true, even if you think at the time that you write this that they are true. If you do that, just as the South China Morning Post would be liable for something like that, you too would be liable.
Even if you're just expressing an opinion?
Well, there is a defense under libel laws of fair comment or honest comment. But the libel law, which is inherited from the UK, the libel law in Hong Kong, is really quite technical. If you are commenting on true facts, then you're okay. If CY Learn sends a legal letter to a newspaper and is criticised for that, and you go onto the internet and say, I think this is outrageous, you should not have letters like that sent to newspapers, you should deal with this in other ways. That's fine, you're commenting on true facts.
That's protected speech.
Right. But one of the things that the courts would look at, if you were unlucky enough to be sued, I don't want to frighten you unnecessarily. I always warn students, please don't walk out of here and never write anything again. But one of the things that the courts will look at is it a comment or is it a statement of fact? If you say that I think whoever it may be is corrupt, is a criminal, just because you put I think in there, it doesn't mean that that's a comment. The courts will look at that and may well regard that as a statement of fact. If it's a statement of fact, if it's true, you're fine. But who has to prove that it's true? You do. Not the person who is complaining about what it is that you have posted.
So the burden of truth is on the person that's actually speaking or writing?
Yes. If you want to, if your defence is to say, well look, okay, this has damaged your reputation. I said you were corrupt. You don't like it, you're suing me, but you are corrupt. It's true. My allegation is true. Do you have to show that?
Show evidence of it.
Yeah.
Okay. So now that we've scared them, where could they go to actually find the resources that spell out what libel and possible criminal comment could be on the internet? I want to give you a resource to go to so you can double check your stuff before you post your next Facebook update.
Well, I can maybe give a plug for Doreen's book.
That's a good idea.
Hong Kong media law, which is the textbook we use, has a very good chapter on defamation.
This is by a professor at the JMSC who's currently on leave but will be coming back next fall. I think this is actually the only comprehensive research that's been done on Hong Kong law. So those of you that are interested in commenting, you may want to pick this up. So.
Right. Yes, this one's available in the university bookshop, I believe. A new updated version is on the way, and that you will find helpful, I think.
Let's just for time's sake, let's jump right to China, and we look at the censorship there as kind of being preeminent internet censorship. I think that Reporters Without Borders states that China is one of the most egregious violators of internet freedom. The statistics on it says out of 178 nations, China ranked 168 in kind of violating internet freedoms and restrictions. looking at that, number one, does it work? You're trying to harness this amorphous entity. Can you actually, I mean, you can physically restrict access, but I know most of my mainland students probably have access to VIP accounts, right? VPN accounts, sorry, rather. You found workarounds to get to sites that you wanted to see while you're in the mainland. How many have done that here? You all use the internet. There you go. Somebody else has here too. No one's going to get arrested here. But let's address that.
It's Hong Kong. Yeah, I don't think it is possible to completely control information which is exchanged on the internet. And China has one of the, if not the most sophisticated systems for controlling the internet. It works on many, many different levels, from people having to register in their own name at internet cafes, to responsibilities on website hosts to ensure that certain content, sensitive issues do not appear.
So there's layers, both technical and human, that serve as filters here.
Yes, I mean, I'm sure students from the mainland will be familiar with the search engine blocking of certain terms, which is something which is peculiar to China. Certain search words you feed in will not take you where you want to go.
Do we have some examples of words that have been flagged?
Tiananmen crackdown, for example, but the censors, it's not as if this is all fed in and then they leave it. They're very sensitive to changing times, changing events. I think if you go back a few years, searching for jasmine, maybe you want some jasmine tea, would not have been a problem. But then we have the jasmine revolution in the Middle East, and worries about, well, maybe something like that could happen in mainland China, and then you can't search for your jasmine tea anymore.
A quick example from any of you that have searched a term while you were on the mainland that wouldn't come up. Somebody give me one.
Sailor Moon in Chinese.
What was it?
At a specific period of time, you cannot search Sailor Moon. The Japanese anime.
Okay,
Sailor Moon, because it has a young girl in it, in the word Sailor Moon. Yeah. And you can. And
okay.
Maybe warrior. I don't know.
Any other ones? Okay.
I think one thing that also happens is that netizens, people using the internet in mainland China, will try to use different terms. Everybody knows what they mean, but they're not terms that maybe the
workarounds in that.
Yes, but then those terms also sometimes end up being blocked. So there's this sort of running battle.
We're talking a little bit about the restrictions and the regulations. Let's move on to outright censorship and the impact of that. We know it exists, but I think perhaps the more informative question here is, what is the impact on this developing global superpower? Censoring its media, censoring its people from free access of information. One of the examples that I always think is very interesting, you remember the People's Daily fairly recently actually repeated a story by the satirical newspaper The Onion. The US has a newspaper called The Onion. It's in both print and internet form, where The Onion named Kim Jong-un the sexiest man of 2012. Well, guess who picked up on that story and ran it as a fact rather than as a fiction, a fake news event? It was the People's Daily. And to me, it wasn't just the fact that it happened, but perhaps it represents some greater disconnect that both the media have and perhaps society has from being insulated from this kind of information, that you can't tell a joke or you can't know what a joke is when you see one. And I'm wondering what your take is on that.
I think you have a point. what interested me about that is it, originally the Onion story was picked up by Hong Kong media, and Hong Kong media made it clear that this was satire, didn't take it seriously. But then at some point when it was then that the Hong Kong media stories were then picked up by mainland state media.
Yeah, just pull up the story.
Okay.
Go ahead.
And somewhere in that transition, the reference to it being a joke was lost, and it started to be taken as a serious story. What
spiraled out of control.
And I think there was 50 pages of photographs of Kim.
Horseback,
right.
walking along the beach, whatever.
But the quote that I loved, one of the editors from the state media that was involved in publishing the story was asked about it and said he didn't see anything wrong with this at all because the story was true. So Kim really is.
So the truth was his defense.
But to answer your question, I think I've been fortunate enough for 30 years as a journalist to work in an environment where I don't face those sorts of restrictions. And I have known journalists who have come from that sort of background into one where they have more freedom and are very excited about that. But I think when you work in an environment where you have to be so careful about what you do, maybe you do, you lose something, you lose an ability to differentiate between something which is intended as a joke, which is clearly a spoof, and something which is not. It certainly doesn't apply to all journalists in the mainland. I don't want to make a generalization here. There's a lot of great
and to be fair, American media outlets have also been fooled by the Onion. They've reported things that have been in there that are just as foolish, or perhaps maybe more foolish.
Indeed they have. Thankfully the South China Morning Post did not fall.
That's why you still have your job.
It raises another important issue, which is with the internet today, so much information available. Of course, this becomes a great resource for journalists. Everybody is watching what is happening. Sina Weibo for China, and it's very easy. Somebody reports something interesting. Thank you very much. Pressure on journalists now to be first with the news because everybody gets it instantly on their mobile phone. It's not that you're all waiting until the next day. So very, very tempting. Something breaks, you have to make a quick decision about whether to publish it or not. But there are certain standards that journalists are expected to meet. We are expected to substantiate our stories. That takes time. And so it does put journalists and editors in a very difficult position sometimes today. With a story like that, well, I really don't know what went on in that newsroom and whether they just failed to recognise that this was not intended to be serious. But it also applies to reports which are serious. Sometimes reports on the internet are true, sometimes they are rumour.
It's that echo chamber effect, where a story, whether it's accurate or not, can be repeated by other media outlets that pick it up as factual and continue to echo it throughout the internet until everyone believes it. And that can be very damaging in terms of credibility and accuracy and so on. And I think that leads to another discussion about, really, who do you trust when you're using the internet as a source? Is it someone that's established like a South China Morning Post, or is it a blogger that may have very good access to something, but maybe doesn't have the same background or the credibility established the way a news organization has?
Yes, I think there you may have heard a lot of people talking about the death of the media industry because newspapers are certainly in the West. Their circulation is going down because everybody goes to websites now, or to their mobile telephones. It's more difficult. Newspapers now go online. It's more difficult to get advertising revenue online. So real challenges for the media industry. But one factor which gives me some optimism here is that now that you have so much information available to you, who do you trust? And the one thing about established, reputable media organisations is that they do have to check their facts. They do have standards that they have to comply with. And I think increasingly, people confronted with so much information, they want to go to trusted sources. And this is an area which I think the mainstream media can exploit.
Well, we're going to help you out with that because we actually have a debate online that features exactly that question. So we can help you grapple with it a little. Was our bloggers and pseudo news sources going to replace the mainstream media? And we had some very good arguments about that. So absolutely. I want to move back to censorship for a second, and then I want to move into a completely different area and then open it up to our audience. On the censorship issue, again, the ultimate effects are the questions that interest me the most. What happens to a society that's continually censored, especially as it's emerging as China is as a global superpower? Will it be able to grow the way it needs to be while still restricting the access of information and the access of its citizens to learn about the world around them?
I think it's a very good question. Personally, I believe that things will change, and it will be necessary for them to change, for China to fulfill its potential and to develop in the way that it should. We need to think a little bit about the idea of freedom of expression, because we talk about it a lot. Why is freedom of expression a good thing? And you just need to think about it. The ability for people, individuals, for you in your studies, if there are certain sources of information that you cannot access, you're not allowed. If there are certain views you cannot express, your search for the truth as a student is going to be restricted, isn't it? And you can see that in terms of a society, there is a need, if people are going to develop, for them to be able to access a wide range of information, to be able to express their views freely, to be able to debate important issues freely. China had spectacular development, something which I think could not have been foreseen 20, 30 years ago. But we know it faces a lot of problems. Economic development's given rise to increasing expectations and aspirations among Chinese people. There have been environmental issues. There are issues relating to corruption. How can you deal with those issues without them leading to violence, violent protests, riots? We've seen this sort of thing happening. How can difficult problems be solved if you do not have an open debate in society about them and search for solutions?
Let me just pose something. Could China be very unique in the sense that this growth can occur without free expression if another alternative is provided, economic enrichment or the pursuit of something besides freedom that may be as attractive to citizens that they're willing to compromise on those things?
Well, you could say to an extent that has happened already. And one argument that you do here is that if you are somebody who does not have much money, what do you want? Most of all, you want food to eat, you want a roof over your head, you want to feel safe. So there is an argument that those sorts of human rights, because that's what they are, should be given priority over other things. However, I think those sorts of rights go hand in hand with the other sorts of rights. The ability to express yourself, fundamental to education, to fulfilling your potential as an individual. So I think on one level, what you say, I mean, China can say, well, we're doing pretty well so far, thank you very much, why should we change? On the other hand, I see no reason why China should not continue to flourish, but to do so in a way in which the citizens are free to express themselves.
Yeah, I think, as you say, it could be a choice of freedoms. You know, for instance, China is making the $250 billion investment in education, which is creating this right to education that can lead to better lives, where you see a lot of Western societies, you know, putting that money in different places, maybe not even investing in human resources, and that loss of education is a loss of freedom in some senses as well. All right, let's move on. One more topic that I'd like to hit, Cliff, before we move on to the debate, and this is because it sets up our debate a little bit, is the idea of copyright. And I know that most of our students here are familiar with the concept of mashups. You know, taking a video or a song or some other artistic type of or creative work, infusing it with something else, and maybe creating a completely different idea. And while this becomes visually very interesting, this mashup may make us laugh or it may be thought-provoking, at the same time, it's using someone else's information, someone else's property, and changing it into something that maybe they didn't intend. And in most cases, it's being done without them being somehow compensated for that. So do we look at this as a phenomenon of the internet and say this kind of creative process is good and we're all benefiting from it, and unfortunately those of you that created the original content are just going to have to enjoy or not enjoy what we see? Or should there be some kind of legal restitution, some kind of compensation that's made, either verbally or written, that gives credit to the originator, or perhaps even gives them compensation if money's made off that new mashup? And I'm just curious, from a legal perspective, where are we headed in that direction, or are we headed anywhere?
Well, I think the position we're in is that this is an area in which efforts are being made to find how to strike the right balance with the law. In many areas, and this is one of them, the law has not really caught up with the technological advances. So when you take somebody's video, or part of their website, maybe their music, and you play with it and you create something else, you are running a risk of breaching their copyright. It doesn't matter whether they have registered their product or not. It is their creation. When they create it, copyright attaches to it. And you may, on a sort of very personal level, you may feel, well, nothing wrong with this. I'm creating something myself. Maybe what I create will be even more popular than the sources that I am using. Maybe the people whose videos or music or whatever you're using will actually be very happy that you have done this.
You're amplifying its reach.
It gives it greater exposure, but maybe not. If you put yourself in their position, maybe you create something, maybe as part of your studies, you create something, maybe it's a very serious video of a debate about the intricacies of media law on the internet. And then somebody else, you don't know them, somebody else comes along and thinks they'll make fun of this. And they, maybe they dub over some funny voices, maybe they play turn it into some form of rap song or something like that.
We as instructors have actually been doing that to our students' debates. You've
been preaching their God. So if that happened to you, maybe you would not feel quite the same way. And The problem really arises, I think, when people are either doing something which is considered really derogatory, they're really doing something they're taking somebody's work and they have changed it in a way which that person feels has made it less valuable. Or they are using it for commercial purposes, and this is really where you do tend to find action being taken, where somebody has produced something for commercial purposes, somebody else takes it, changes it, and makes money out of it without asking their permission. I think with all of these things, it comes down to a question of risk. Will the person whose video you are using, are they really going to come after you? Are they really going to seek to assert their copyright in the courts in Hong Kong? But it is something to be aware of, because this issue has really not been settled.
And we're really seeing it more and more as viewers are becoming content creators. They want to engage with the material that they're watching in a different way, not just passively viewing it, but actually changing it, which I think is both interesting and kind of disturbing in some ways.
Well, it is, and I think that's unstoppable, and it's something which media organisations themselves have had to come to terms with. In the past, we've been used to, we tell you what the news is. This is important. You read this. Now, I find it at the SNP, fairly recently, we've established some TV screens in our newsroom that tell us what are the most popular stories on our website. So we can see
at the moment.
Yeah, we can see a league table. And it's very interesting, because sometimes the most popular stories are not necessarily the ones that the editors would have chosen.
Definitely not the most serious, usually.
Right, usually not the most serious at all. So, yeah, it raises a bit interesting.
All right, let's open this up for a couple of questions, and then we're going to wrap it up. Cliff's been very generous with his time today, and I think it's been incredibly insightful. Any questions about some of the topics that we discussed? Censorship. Hey, we're still in class here, please. Censorship, privacy, Mashables, legal law in Hong Kong. How do you keep from getting busted for your blog? Questions? Yes.
I want to ask that if the China government maintains the same censorship like as before for the next few years, do you think that the internet will go out of control of them? Because you know that Chinese people, they already know how to use proxy servers, how to go over the wall. Do you think that there will be a breakthrough in terms of the freedom of speech and expressing ideas in the China internet, even if the government did not let go of the censorship?
Yeah, I think it is going to be very difficult to control the flow of information. I am an optimist. I think that more freedom will come. I think we're already seeing that despite all of the efforts that the government goes to control, you cannot control it completely. And I think the discussions that you see on the internet in mainland China are discussions that would not have taken place before the internet was there. People are finding ways to access information that they would not have been able to access before. Whether it is like the opening up of a dam, whether it's like a flood, it's very difficult to say. But I would say that what you suggest quite likely to happen. I mean, it may not be a very dramatic, from one day to the next, but we have seen that there has been this development, and you will see matters being discussed. Then sometimes there's a crackdown. But I would hope that what will actually happen is that the government starts to realise that this can help China, and that having a freer flow of information can actually help the government deal with some of the issues that it needs to deal with.
And perhaps make them more responsive in some ways. Yeah.
Indeed.
One final question. Anybody have a killer question? Yes.
That's where they have a heart attack.
Do you think there should be a law in terms of the copyright issues for the mashups and stuff? And if there's a law, do you think there'll be a positive or negative effect towards this, let's say, the music industry?
When you say a law, do you mean a law to clarify the situation, or because laws exist at the moment on copyright. I think that the problem is whenever you start passing a dedicated law, you are trusting the people who pass the law to get the balance right. And what we often find in Hong Kong when these issues are discussed is that we say, right, we need to pass a law. And maybe the Law Reform Commission, which is a body which puts forward proposals for legal reform, they will put forward some very detailed proposals. Maybe you even go so far as a consultation where the public can express their views. But then we reach a point where there is some controversy, there is some concern that actually this law might act to restrict the free flow of information, and then the whole thing gets dropped. And we have seen that happen with proposals for laws in this area in Hong Kong. So concerns arise that maybe something like parody will be outlawed under the laws, and on the face of it they all look very nice, but people worry about how in practice they will work. And what often happens in Hong Kong is that we just think better just to leave it and let the law evolve and find a way. The Creative Commons, which allows people who are happy to have their work taken up, adapted, used by others, maybe under certain conditions, they can give a license through the Creative Commons to enable that to happen. Maybe that is one way to go forward, where you create something, you think to yourself, well, people may want to use this, they're probably not going to come and contact me, they might be worried about whether they can or they can't, so maybe I just make it clear through an organisation like the Creative Commons that I don't mind, so long as they don't make a lot of money out of it or something like that.
That's actually a kind of a good solution for a lot of things, starting up front, that live material can be used for other things. I don't have a problem with that.
Maybe in the future.
Okay, we're going to leave it at that. Everyone, a big round of applause for our guest today, Buddle, and legal expert, and someone that is going to keep you out of jail for your vlogs. So make sure that you study up on that Hong Kong law, everyone. But thank you very much. Everyone that's involved in the debate, please come on up here and get the chairs situated. We're running a little bit behind, so we get you sorted. Opposition, how have we been doing this? Opposition on this side, opposition on that side.
Thank you so much. Really enjoyed it.